The Stoics said we suffer more in imagination than in reality, but what if reality surpasses even our worst fears? In Juliana Wells' world, the nightmare wasn't imagined, it was real. And it started with the man who once vowed to love her forever. What happens when the man who promised to protect you becomes the architect of your destruction? For Juliana Wells, her fairy tale life shattered the moment the courtroom doors slammed shut. She was pregnant, innocent, and sentenced to prison for a crime she didn't commit. The accuser? Her billionaire husband, Everett Langston, convinced she had stolen a priceless heirloom. But the real thief was hiding in plain sight, a venomous mistress who framed her perfectly. This is the story of a devastating betrayal, a mother's fight for survival, and a husband's confession that came far, far too late. The penthouse apartment felt less like a home and more like a pristine museum exhibit floating above the heart of Los Angeles. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine. Every piece of art was worth more than the average person's lifetime earnings, and every window offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the city below. This was Juliana Wells's life now, a life she had stepped into when she married Everett Langston, the media mogul whose name was synonymous with disruption and ruthless power. At 30, Juliana, a gifted interior designer with a spirit far gentler than the cutthroat world she now inhabited, often felt like another beautiful acquisition. She loved Everett, or at least she loved the man she saw in their quiet moments. The man who would trace the curve of her growing belly with a look of genuine wonder, whispering plans for their daughter. But that man was often eclipsed by the titan of industry, Everett Langston, who commanded networks and whose time was measured in millions of dollars per minute. His most trusted lieutenant in all things was Vivienne Park. She was his executive assistant, though the title was a gross understatement. Vivienne was Everett's shadow, his gatekeeper, his external hard drive. She was sleek, intelligent, and possessed an ambition that burned with the intensity of a blue flame. She had been with Everett for years, long before Juliana, and made no secret of her belief that she understood him in ways a wife never could. Juliana's unease around Vivienne was a constant, low-grade hum. It was in the way Vivienne would enter their private residence without knocking, a file in hand, her eyes flicking over Juliana with a dismissive coolness. It was in the inside jokes she shared with Everett, references to deals and trips that predated Juliana's existence. Juliana told herself it was her own insecurity, the lingering ghost of her small-town Texas upbringing rattling around in this palace of marble and chrome. The source of the impending storm, though she didn't know it yet, was locked away in Everett's private safe. It was a necklace known as the Seraphina Star, a staggering deep violet amethyst, the size of a robin's egg, suspended in a web of antique white gold and diamonds. It had belonged to his mother, a woman Everett spoke of with a reverence that bordered on worship. One evening, a few weeks before the Langston Foundation's annual charity gala, which was to be held at their penthouse, Everett opened the safe. "I want you to wear it for the gala," he said, his voice soft as he lifted the heavy jewel from its velvet bed. Juliana gasped. The necklace was cold and heavy in her palm, radiating a history and value that was terrifying. "Everett, I can't, it's a legend. What if something happens to it?" "Nothing will happen to it," he said, his confidence absolute. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers cool against her skin. In the mirror, the amethyst seemed to swallow the light in the room, its violet depths a stark contrast to her simple ivory dress and the warm glow of her pregnancy. "It belongs on you now. You are the lady of this house." Vivienne, entering with a schedule update, paused at the doorway. Her eyes locked onto the necklace, and for a fleeting second, Juliana saw something raw and unguarded in her gaze, a flash of pure, unadulterated envy. It vanished just as quickly, replaced by a tight, professional smile. "Stunning, Juliana," Vivienne said, her voice smooth as silk. "A queen's jewel. You'll be the talk of the gala." The night of the gala was a dizzying blur of camera flashes, champagne flutes, and the hollow laughter of Los Angeles' elite. Juliana, feeling large and clumsy in her bespoke maternity gown, wore the Seraphina Star with a paralyzing sense of dread. She felt the weight of it, not just as a jewel, but as a symbol of Everett's trust. She took it off the moment they were alone, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed it back to him. It was beautiful, she confessed with a nervous laugh, but I'm terrified of it. Everett smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that made her heart ache. You were the beautiful one. He placed the necklace back in its case, spun the dial on the safe, and patted the steel door. Safe and sound. 2 days later, the world ended. It began with a frantic search. A sheikh Everett had been courting for a major international media venture was in town and had expressed interest in seeing the famous amethyst. It was a power play, a display of legacy. Wanting to close the deal, Everett went to the safe. He came out moments later, his face pale, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Juliana? Where is it? Where is what? She asked, looking up from the nursery blueprints she was reviewing. Don't play games. The necklace. The Seraphina star. It's not in the safe. A cold fear, sharp and immediate, pierced through her. What? That's impossible. You put it back. I saw you. They searched the study together, a frantic, useless exercise. It wasn't there. Everett's controlled panic was escalating into something uglier. That's when Vivian appeared, her expression a perfect mask of concern. Everett, what's wrong? She asked, rushing to his side. The necklace is gone, he bit out, running a hand through his hair. It's been stolen. Vivian's eyes widened. She placed a comforting hand on his arm, a gesture of familiarity that grated on Juliana's nerves. Stolen? But how? The security here is… She trailed off, then her eyes shifted as if a sudden, terrible thought had occurred to her. Oh, Everett. No. What is it? He demanded. It's probably nothing, Vivian said, hesitating for dramatic effect. But the other day I was looking for a swatch book in Juliana's studio. I saw a box. I didn't think anything of it, but… She didn't need to finish. The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Everett's gaze swung to Juliana, his eyes hardening with a suspicion that struck like a physical blow. My studio? Juliana was bewildered. What are you talking about? Without another word, Everett strode down the hall to the small, sunlit room Juliana used for her design work. She followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Vivian trailed behind them, a silent, watchful presence. Everett tore through the room. His usual precision was gone, replaced by desperate fury. He ripped open closets, drawers, portfolio cases, and then, tucked away in a shoebox on the top shelf of a closet where Juliana kept old sketches, he found it. He pulled out a necklace. For a split second, relief washed over Juliana, until she saw it properly. It was a crude imitation. The amethyst was glass. The diamonds were nothing more than zirconia chips. The platinum was cheap-plated metal, a gaudy, worthless replica of the Seraphina star. Everett held it up. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Juliana's ragged breathing. What is this, Juliana? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I've never seen that before in my life, she stammered, her mind reeling. How did it get there? Who would? Her eyes shot to Vivian. Vivian met her gaze, and for the first time there was no mask, only triumph. You plan to replace it, Everett said, his voice flat with dawning horror and conviction. You took the real one and left this piece of trash, hoping I wouldn't notice, for months, years even. No, Everett, listen to me, Juliana pleaded, taking a step toward him. I would never. Someone put that there. It was her. She pointed a shaking finger at Vivian. Vivian flinched back, a masterful performance of being wounded. Me? Vivian said, her voice trembling. Juliana, why would you say that? I'm just trying to help. She's always been jealous. She wants what we have. Juliana's voice was rising, becoming hysterical, and she knew, even as the words tumbled out, that it was making her look guiltier. A sudden rush of nausea rose in her throat. Her knees trembled, and her hands clutched her belly in instinctive defense. She could feel the room spinning, not from dizziness, but from betrayal. Everett's eyes, once a place of safety, now pierced her like knives. She had dreamed of these walls as her sanctuary, but now they closed in like a cage. A part of her wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him remember who she really was, but she could already see it. The decision in his face, the verdict written in his eyes. Everett's face was like stone. The love, the trust, the man who had looked at their unborn child with such wonder, it was all gone. In his place stood a judge, a jury, an executioner, convinced of her guilt. He saw his wife, the woman from a humble background, pregnant, and perhaps now in his mind, desperate to secure a future for herself in case things went wrong. He saw the worthless replica and the priceless original that was missing. He saw a betrayal of his mother's memory. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said, his voice cracking with the agony of his own conclusion. He turned to Vivienne. "Call the police." The arrival of the Los Angeles Police Department detectives turned the surreal nightmare into a cold procedural reality. The penthouse, once a symbol of Juliana's elevated life, became a crime scene. Men in somber suits spoke in low, serious tones, their presence a violation of the home's sterile perfection. Juliana sat on a plush sofa, a cashmere throw clutched in her hands, feeling as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. Everett was a storm of controlled fury and wounded pride. He presented the narrative Vivienne had so expertly crafted. He spoke of the necklace's immense sentimental value, his decision to let Juliana wear it, and the shocking discovery of the replica in her personal studio. Every word was a nail in her coffin. "Mr. Langston, did your wife have any financial troubles before you were married?" One of the detectives, a man named Taurus with weary eyes, asked. Before Everett could answer, Vivienne interjected softly. "Forgive me for speaking out of turn, detective, but I manage some of Everett's personal financial integrations. There were some significant student loans and a bit of credit card debt. Nothing unmanageable, of course." She let the sentence hang, pregnant with insinuation. "Lies." Juliana shot to her feet. "My student loans were nearly paid off. I had no debt." "Everett, tell them." Everett wouldn't look at her. He simply gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to the detective. "There were some debts," he confirmed, his voice gravelly. "I took care of them when we married." It was a truth twisted into a weapon. Yes, he had insisted on clearing her modest loans, a grand gesture of his wealth. But now, in this context, it painted her as a charity case, a woman with a history of needing money. A woman who might be tempted by a multi-million-dollar amethyst. Juliana felt the air shift around her, like the world had turned slightly colder. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the silence. The silence from the man who had once promised to believe her, to protect her. The silence that weighed heavier than any accusation. The detectives questioned Juliana. Her denials were passionate, her accusations against Vivienne fervent. But to their trained, cynical ears, she sounded like every other cornered suspect. Her story was wild, a manipulative assistant framing the boss's wife out of jealousy. The alternative, a pregnant wife swapping a priceless heirloom for a fake, seemed simpler, more tangible. They had the replica found in her possession. They had a motive, however twisted. They had the word of Everett Langston. She was arrested. The quiet click of the handcuffs around her wrists was the loudest sound she had ever heard. They led her from her home, past the priceless art and the panoramic views, her mind numb with disbelief. Her fingers instinctively twitched toward her stomach, as if shielding the life inside could somehow protect it from the weight of injustice. With each step away from the apartment, the reality sank deeper. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exile. The final, devastating blow was the look on Everett's face as she was escorted out. It wasn't just anger, it was a profound, soul-deep disappointment. He truly believed she had done it. The media descended like vultures. The story was irresistible. Langston's bride, a burglar. Billionaire's pregnant wife charged in jewel heist. Her face was plastered everywhere, a grainy, unflattering photo from a college event. The narrative was set. She was a gold digger who got too greedy. Her only lifeline was her best friend, Tessa, a fiercely loyal elementary school teacher who stormed into the precinct like a hurricane. "This is insane, Juliana. We're going to fight this. We'll get the best lawyer in the city," Tessa vowed, her hands gripping the bars of the holding cell. But Everett Langston had already retained the best lawyers for the prosecution. He was determined to see justice served for the desecration of his mother's memory. He spared no expense, building a formidable legal wall that Juliana, with her limited resources, could never hope to breach. Her court-appointed lawyer was competent but overworked, facing a team of legal assassins funded by a billionaire's righteous fury. The trial was a public crucifixion. On the stand, Everett was a figure of tragic nobility. He spoke of his love for his mother, the significance of the necklace, and the ultimate betrayal by the woman he had trusted with his heart and home. His testimony was devastating. His pain was palpable to the jury. Vivienne's performance was even more brilliant. She played the role of the reluctant witness, the loyal employee forced to reveal a painful truth. She recounted finding the replica with feigned tears, her voice breaking as she described Everett's heartbreak. She painted a picture of Juliana as being secretive, often complaining about being financially dependent and expressing a casual envy of the Langston family's legacy. They were small, insidious lies, impossible to disprove and powerful in their cumulative effect. When Juliana took the stand, her own story sounded flimsy and desperate in comparison. Her voice shook with a mixture of terror and rage. She tried to explain Vivian's campaign of subtle sabotage, the looks, the comments, the constant undermining. But without proof, her words sounded like the paranoid ramblings of a guilty woman trying to deflect blame. As she looked across the courtroom, she locked eyes with Everett for a brief, shattering second. A tremor passed through her chest, so sharp and sudden it made her breath catch. Her throat constricted. The sterile courtroom lights blurred at the edges. A wave of dizziness crashed over her. Her pulse roared in her ears. Her knees buckled slightly, and for a terrifying instant, she thought she might faint right there on the witness stand. But she gripped the wooden ledge with white knuckles and forced herself to breathe. Slow, measured. She couldn't fall apart. Not here. Not now. Mrs. Langston, the prosecuting attorney said, his voice dripping with condescension. Are you asking this jury to believe that Miss Park, a trusted employee of 10 years, orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy, risked her entire career, and planted a fake necklace in your closet, all because she was what? A little jealous? Yes, Juliana insisted. That's exactly what I'm asking. Her eyes pleaded with the impassive faces of the jury. The prosecutor just smiled, sadly, as if pitying her delusion. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Guilty. The judge's voice seemed to come from a great distance as he read the sentence. 5 to 7 years at the California Institution for Women. A strangled sob escaped Juliana's throat. Her eyes flew to Everett. She searched his face for any flicker of doubt, any hint of the man she loved. She found nothing but a mask of cold, resolute duty. He had to believe this. To admit even the possibility of her innocence would be to admit his own monstrous failure, his gullibility, his catastrophic lack of judgment. It was easier to brand her a criminal than to face his own role in the tragedy. As the court officers led her away, she pressed a hand to her swollen belly. This was no longer just about her. They were sending her child to prison with her. She looked back one last time at the man who had been her husband, her partner, the father of her baby. He turned away, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. The love story was over. The real sentence was just beginning. The transition from a penthouse in the sky to a 6 by 9 feet concrete cell was a brutal, soul-crushing amputation of self. California Institution for Women was a world of gray concrete, clanging steel doors and the pervasive scent of industrial cleaner, failing to mask the underlying odor of despair. The first few weeks were a blur of humiliating procedures, ill-fitting uniforms, and the constant oppressive noise of the institution. Juliana's pregnancy, once a source of joy and anticipation, became her greatest vulnerability and her only reason to survive. She was terrified. Every meal, every step, every interaction was filtered through the primal need to protect the life growing inside her. The other inmates regarded her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was the billionaire's wife, a fallen princess whose story had been tabloid fodder. To them, she was a tourist in their world of generational poverty and systemic failure. Her salvation came in the unlikely form of Marisol, a woman in her late 40s serving a long sentence for armed robbery. Marisol was tough, with eyes that had seen everything and a network of alliances that made her a quiet power on the cell block. She saw the raw terror in Juliana's eyes, the hand that instinctively cradled her belly and took her under her wing. "Stop looking so scared," Marisol told her one day in the mess hall, her voice a low rasp. "Fear is blood in the water here. You're a mother now. Act like it." Marisol taught her the unwritten rules, which guards to avoid, how to trade for better food, who to trust, and how to make herself invisible. She taught Juliana that survival in prison wasn't about being the strongest, it was about being the smartest, about seeing angles no one else did. For the first time since her arrest, Juliana felt a flicker of agency. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Everett Langston was trying to erase her. He had Vivian orchestrate a quiet, swift divorce. He poured himself into his work with renewed ferocity, launching new media platforms, closing billion-dollar mergers. He and Vivienne were now a public power couple. Her presence at his side was a constant fixture in financial news. She had moved into the penthouse, her clothes now filling the closet that had once been Juliana's. She had everything she had ever wanted. But the victory felt strangely hollow to Everett. The penthouse was colder, the silence heavier. At night, he'd find himself walking past the sealed nursery, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Vivienne would gently guide him away, her touch smooth and reassuring. "Don't torture yourself, darling," she'd murmur. "She wasn't the person you thought she was." He clung to those words like a mantra, a shield against the creeping tendrils of doubt. 7 months into her sentence, Juliana went into labor. The experience was a primitive agony, a world away from the sanitized birthing suite she and Everett had once planned. The prison infirmary was stark and cold, the staff indifferent. Marisol stood guard outside the door, ensuring no one bothered her. Through the haze of pain, Juliana focused on one thing: her son. Noah Wells was born, small but healthy. His first cries echoed in the sterile room. Holding him for the first time, Juliana felt a love so fierce it eclipsed all the pain, all the injustice. His tiny fingers curled around hers, and in that moment, he was the only thing in the world that was real and true. The cruelty of her situation became starkly clear. She was allowed to keep him with her in the prison's nursery unit for only a short time. Every day was a precious stolen gift. She memorized the shape of his ears, the scent of his skin, the way his eyes, so much like Everett's, blinked slowly in the dim light. The day she had to hand him over to Tessa was the day her heart truly broke. Tessa stood on the other side of a sterile visitation room divider, her face a mask of grief. "I'll take care of him, Juliana. I swear it," Tessa sobbed, reaching for the baby. "I'll bring him to visit every week. He will know who his mother is." Giving Noah to her friend felt like tearing off a limb. As she watched them walk away, a part of Juliana died. The fight went out of her, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. She was just a number now, a ghost haunting a concrete box. Tessa was true to her word. She created a private social media page, accessible only to a few trusted family members, where she posted photos and updates about Noah. It was a way for Juliana to watch her son grow from afar, through smuggled printouts that Marisol would get for her. One evening, nearly a year after the trial, Everett found himself sleeplessly scrolling through a business contacts feed. A shared post caught his eye. It was from Tessa. He remembered her as Juliana's fiery, loyal friend. The post was public, a rare slip-up on Tessa's part. It was a picture of a baby boy sitting in a high chair, a smear of sweet potato on his cheek. His eyes, those eyes, were laughing at the camera. The caption read, "My beautiful godson Noah, 1 year old today. Your mama loves you more than all the stars in the sky, and she will be home soon." Everett froze. He zoomed in on the photo. The boy had his jawline, his dark hair, and the exact same shape of his eyes. This was his son. A son he had abandoned. A son who was growing up without a father, whose mother was in prison because of him. He saw the comments below the post. One read, "He looks just like his mother, so strong." Another, "That Langston monster doesn't deserve to even know this angel exists." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Monster. For the first time, the carefully constructed walls of his certainty began to crumble. He looked at the laughing baby in the photo and felt not the satisfaction of justice served, but a cold, creeping dread. The dread that he had been catastrophically wrong. The image of Noah laughing in his high chair became seared into Everett's mind. It haunted his days. It invaded his dreams. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw the boy's eyes staring back at him. The word monster echoed in the silence of the penthouse. His impenetrable certainty had been the foundation of his actions. He had known Juliana was guilty. He'd seen the evidence, heard the testimony. But the photo of his son chipped away at that foundation, until hairline fractures of doubt spread through everything. What if he had been wrong? The magnitude of that possibility was so immense, so terrifying, that he could barely breathe. He began his own quiet, obsessive investigation, operating in the shadows of his own life. He couldn't alert Vivienne. His suspicion was still just a phantom, and he knew she was too smart, too embedded in his life to risk tipping her off. He had to unravel the story himself, thread by painful thread. His first step was to revisit the narrative that had convicted Juliana, her supposed financial desperation. He had blindly accepted Vivian's summary of Juliana's significant debts. Now he bypassed his own company's accountants and hired an outside forensic accounting firm, giving them a simple directive: find everything you can about Juliana Wells's finances for the 5 years prior to our marriage. While he waited for their report, he turned his attention to the penthouse security systems. He, better than anyone, knew their capabilities. He spent hours reviewing footage from the days surrounding the theft. On the surface, nothing was amiss. But Everett wasn't looking at the surface. He was looking for what wasn't there. He analyzed entry logs, motion sensor activity, network access points. He found it late one night, in the server room, a 5-minute data gap in the security log for the hallway leading to Juliana's studio. It occurred at 2:17 a.m., 3 days before the necklace was reported missing. To any normal security review, it would look like a minor system glitch, a momentary reboot. But Everett knew his own system. It didn't glitch. A gap like that had to be manually created by someone with the highest level of admin privileges. Only 2 people had that access: Horn and Vivian. A cold sweat broke out on his skin. He remembered being on a conference call with Tokyo that night. He had been in his office for hours. The report from the forensic accountants arrived the next day. It was a thin folder. The summary was stark. Juliana Wells had been the model of financial responsibility. She had 2 outstanding student loans, which she was paying down ahead of schedule through disciplined, automated payments. Her credit card had a 0 balance. She had a modest but growing savings account. There was no desperation. There was no significant debt. There was only a woman carefully building a life for herself. Vivian's claims at the trial had been a complete fabrication, a lie. A deliberate, calculated lie. Everett felt the floor drop out from under him. He had built his empire on data, on facts, on seeing through deception. And he had been played for a fool by the person he trusted most. The image of Juliana on the witness stand, her face streaked with tears, her voice raw as she pleaded with him to believe her, flashed in his mind. He had turned away. His focus narrowed to the replica necklace. In the storm of the investigation and trial, no one had bothered to trace its origin. It had simply been Exhibit A, the proof of Juliana's deceit. Now, it was the key. Using a proxy, he had the evidence file from the LAPD discreetly pulled for reevaluation. He hired a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Ari, whose specialty was tracing the untraceable. As Everett delved deeper, Vivian sensed the shift. He was distant, preoccupied. The easy intimacy they had cultivated since Juliana's imprisonment had evaporated, replaced by a polite, formal chill. "Is everything all right, Everett?" she asked one evening, placing a hand on his shoulder as he stared out at the city lights. "You seem so far away." He forced a smile. "Just a lot on my mind with the new merger. Long days." She accepted the lie. But her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, were watchful. She began to subtly reassert her control, anticipating his needs, managing his schedule with even more ruthless efficiency, leaving him no room to breathe, no room to think. She was reminding him how indispensable she was. But it was too late. He was already pulling at the thread. Ari, the investigator, called a week later. "The replica is high-quality theatrical work," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Not something you buy off the street. The materials are specific. I tracked the zirconia chips to a supplier who sells exclusively to a handful of artisans in the tri-state area. One of them is a man named Antoine Dubois, operating out of a small studio in Echo Park. Specializes in period pieces for film and private commissions. He's a cash-only artist. No paper trail. Get me a meeting," Everett ordered, his heart pounding. 2 days later, Everett was sitting in a cluttered, dusty workshop that smelled of metal and polish. Antoine Dubois was a small, nervous man with ink-stained fingers. He was terrified of Everett Langston, but Ari's methods had been very persuasive. "I don't want trouble," Antoine stammered. "You won't have any, provided you tell me the truth," Everett said, his voice calm and cold. "A little over a year and a half ago, you made a replica of this necklace." He slid a high-resolution photo of the Serafina star across the table. Antoine paled, nodding slowly. "Yes, I remember. A very specific job. The client was particular. Describe her. I never saw her face clearly. She wore a large hat, sunglasses, always paid in cash, but Antoine paused, trying to recall more details. She smelled of something, a perfume, very distinctive, tuberose, I think, and she wore a ring on her right index finger. A silver snake eating its own tail. Everett's blood ran cold. The Ouroboros ring. Vivienne had worn it every day for the past decade. It was a gift from her first mentor. She never took it off. He had her. The thread had been unraveled. Now all that was left was to watch the entire tapestry of lies come undone. The drive back to Westwood was a blur. The confirmation of Vivienne's guilt didn't bring Everett relief. Only a sickening, hollow certainty. He wasn't just a fool. He was an accessory. His arrogance and his wounded pride had been the weapons Vivienne used to destroy Juliana. And he had handed them to her willingly. He spent the next 48 hours constructing a trap. He moved with the cold, predatory precision he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. He had Ari install discreet, high-fidelity audio and video recorders in his study, the same room where Juliana's life had been dismantled. He instructed his legal team to prepare 2 sets of documents. One, a severance package for Vivienne of unprecedented generosity. The other, a comprehensive file detailing the evidence against her, to be delivered to the district attorney's office. The final piece of his plan was the bait. He called Vivienne into the study on a Friday evening. "Close the door," he said, his tone casual. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." She entered smiling, the ever-efficient partner, ready to solve a problem. She was wearing the Ouroboros ring. The faint floral scent of tuberose perfume trailed behind her. "I've received an extraordinary offer for another one of my mother's pieces," he began, gesturing to a velvet box on his desk. "This emerald suite. The offer is almost too good to be true. Before I proceed, I need to have it independently verified and a replica made for the insurance records. The process is a bit unorthodox. It requires absolute discretion." He watched her face. For a fraction of a second, her professional mask slipped. A flicker of avarice, of calculation crossed her features before being smoothed away. "Of course," she said. "I can handle that for you. I know just the person. Discreet. Works off book." "Excellent," Everett said, leaning back in his chair. "Cash only, I assume? Like Antoine Dubois?" The name hit her like a physical shock. Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. "I don't know who that is." "Don't you?" Everett's voice dropped, losing all its warmth. "He's an artisan in Echo Park. He remembers you. He remembers the hat, the sunglasses. He remembers the smell of tuberose." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "And he remembers the ring." Vivienne instinctively tucked her right hand behind her back. "This is ridiculous, Everett. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a 5-minute data gap in my security logs. I'm talking about a forensic accounting report that shows Juliana had no debt. I'm talking about perjury, Vivienne. I'm talking about fabricating evidence. I'm talking about you sending an innocent, pregnant woman to prison." She stared at him, her mind racing, searching for an escape route. She tried tears first. "Everett, how can you even think this? After everything I've done for you, for this company. She twisted your mind against me. She was always jealous of our relationship." "Stop," he commanded, his voice like cracking ice. "The performance is over." He gestured to a nearly invisible lens embedded in the bookshelf. "The cameras are rolling." Her tears vanished, replaced by a cold fury. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered, revealing the years of bitterness and resentment beneath. "You want a confession?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Fine. Yes, I did it. Every last bit of it." She stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal, her confession pouring out in a torrent of rage. "I gave you 10 years of my life. I was there for every deal, every crisis, every all-nighter. I built this empire with you. I was your partner in everything but name. And what was my reward? To stand by and watch you give it all away to some dewy-eyed little architect who didn't have a clue what it meant to be a Langston?" Her voice dripped with contempt. "She was weak. She didn't deserve you. She didn't deserve this life. I deserved it. I earned it." "The necklace?" Everett asked, his voice hollow. "Pathetically easy," she scoffed. "I had the replica made weeks in advance. Swapped them out the night of the gala when you were both distracted. I knew your security protocols better than your own guards. Planting it in her studio was child's play. And you You were so blinded by your precious mother's memory and your own arrogance. You believed every word. You wanted to believe it. It was easier than admitting you'd married beneath you. The cruelty of her words was breathtaking. She had seen his weakness, his pride, and used it as a lever to orchestrate the entire tragedy. "Where is the real one?" he demanded. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "It's my severance package. My retirement plan, hidden away where you'll never find it." Everett didn't move. He just stared at the woman he thought he knew, a stranger filled with a poison he had never seen. "You won't need a retirement plan where you're going, Vivienne." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Frank, please come in, and bring the gentleman with you." The study door opened. 2 LAP detectives stepped inside. It was Detective Torres, the same officer from the initial investigation, and his partner. Torres's face was grim. He had read the file Everett's lawyers had prepared. Vivienne's face went white with genuine shock. She looked from the detectives to Everett, a final, desperate plea in her eyes. Everett met her gaze, his own expression devoid of any emotion but a vast, empty regret. "It's over." As they read Vivienne her rights and cuffed her, the full, crushing weight of Everett's failure descended upon him. This confession wasn't a victory. It was a testament to his own monumental blindness. He hadn't just been wrong, he had been a monster. And his confession, the one that truly mattered, was still to come, and it would be far, far too late. The arrest of Vivienne Park ignited a media firestorm that dwarfed the original scandal. The headlines were brutal. Langston's empire of lies, Mistress admits to framing pregnant wife femme. In the new narrative, Everett was no longer the tragic, wronged husband. He was recast as a gullible fool at best, a cruel accomplice at worst. Langston Media's stock price plummeted as the market reacted to the instability and the moral rot at the company's core. For Everett, the public humiliation was nothing compared to the private agony. Everett was haunted by the knowledge that every clang of a prison door, every lonely night Juliana had spent in a cell, every terrified moment of her prison birth, was his fault. He had not only allowed it to happen, he had powered it with his wealth and his rage. His lawyers, along with a new team specializing in wrongful convictions, moved swiftly. With Vivienne's full confession, the evidence of her conspiracy, and Everett's own sworn affidavit admitting his catastrophic error, the legal path to exonerating Juliana was clear, though still fraught with bureaucratic inertia. At Echo Valley Correctional Facility, the news arrived on a smuggled copy of the Los Angeles Post that Marisol slid under Juliana's cell door. Juliana stared at the headline. At the picture of Vivienne in handcuffs, her face a mask of defiant fury. She felt nothing. There was no surge of triumphant joy, no satisfying thirst for vengeance quenched. There was only a profound, hollow exhaustion, as if she had been holding her breath for 2 years and could finally let it go. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. The photo didn't vindicate her. It only confirmed what she already knew, that justice delayed could never be true justice. Freedom was coming. But what did freedom even mean anymore? It couldn't give her back her son's first words, his first steps. It couldn't erase the memory of giving birth on a cold infirmary table, or the phantom weight of handcuffs on her wrists. The truth had come out, but it was a truth scarred and damaged, arriving long after the lie had done its work. Everett, desperate and broken, attempted to visit her. He needed to see her, to apologize, to beg for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. The request came back stamped with a single damning word: refused. Days later, the final orders came through. Juliana Wells was officially exonerated of all charges. Her conviction was vacated. She was a free woman. The release process was quiet, surreal. She walked through the same gates she had entered 2 years prior, trading her gray prison uniform for simple clothes. Tessa had brought them. The world seemed too loud, too bright, too fast as she stepped into the sunlight. She saw a media circus held back by barricades. And she saw him. Everett was standing by a black town car, looking gaunt and older. His eyes, desperate and pleading, found hers across the pavement. He took a hesitant step toward her, but Tessa moved between them, a fierce and protective barrier. "Not today, Everett," Tessa said, her voice trembling with rage. "Not ever, if I have my way." Juliana didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed on Tessa's car, on the child seat in the back. She got in without a word, and Tessa drove away, leaving Everett standing alone on the pavement. A ghost at a reunion he was not invited to. Their first stop was Tessa's small, warm apartment in Silver Lake. The moment Juliana walked through the door, a small boy with dark, curly hair and familiar eyes toddled toward them, looking at her with a stranger's curiosity. "Noah," Tessa whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Mama's home." Juliana sank to her knees, her arms outstretched. Noah hesitated, glancing back at Tessa, his anchor, for reassurance. Juliana's heart broke and swelled at the same time. She was a stranger to her own son. She didn't rush him. She just waited, her face wet with silent tears. She tried to memorize every inch of his face in that moment, terrified it would disappear again, that this fragile reunion might shatter like glass. Finally, driven by a toddler's curiosity, Noah took a few wobbly steps forward and placed a tiny hand on her cheek. "Mama?" he whispered, testing the word. "Yes, baby," Juliana sobbed, pulling him into a gentle embrace, breathing in the sweet scent of her child for the first time as a free woman. "Mama's here." She held him, rocking back and forth on the floor of her friend's apartment, the gaping wounds of the last 2 years finally beginning to feel the first touch of healing. She was free. She had her son, but the reckoning was yet to come. Life after prison was a fragile, disorienting puzzle. Juliana and Noah moved into a quiet bungalow in Silver Lake, paid for by a victim's compensation fund the state had awarded her. Every day was a process of rediscovery. She learned the rhythm of her son's life, his favorite books, his hatred of peas, the way he giggled when she tickled him. She was rebuilding her life from the ashes. But the ghosts of her past were never far. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, the metallic clang of a cell door echoing in her ears. Sometimes she would find herself staring at the walls, half expecting them to be concrete, half dreading the realization they were not. Freedom was real, but her body hadn't caught up with the truth. Everett, true to his word, began his campaign of atonement. It started with a formal offer delivered by his lawyers. A settlement of $50 million, the Westwood penthouse, any property she desired, and a public apology he would read from the steps of Langston Media's global headquarters. Juliana's response was swift. She sent back the legal documents with a single sentence written across the front in red ink. "My life is not for sale." She knew, however, that she couldn't cut him out completely. He was Noah's father. For the sake of her son, she finally agreed to meet him, not in a lawyer's office or a fancy restaurant, but on neutral ground, a quiet bench in Griffith Park. He arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a shell of a man consumed by guilt, etched into every line on his face. "Juliana," he began, his voice raspy, "thank you for seeing me." "I'm not here for you, Everett," she cut him off, her voice steady and devoid of the fire he'd expected. It was colder and far more devastating. "I'm here for my son. He will one day ask about his father, and I need to be able to tell him that I gave his father a chance to explain why he sent his mother to prison." The words, delivered so calmly, struck him harder than any slap. "There is no explanation," he whispered, his eyes on the ground. "Only a confession. I was arrogant. I was proud. When I thought you'd betrayed me, betrayed my mother's memory. My grief and my ego made me blind. Vivian showed me what I wanted to see, and I was too much of a coward to look any deeper. I failed you in every way a man can fail a woman. I am so sorry." She listened, her expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't give me back the 2 years I lost," she said quietly. "It doesn't give Noah back his mother for the first year of his life." "You talk about your mother's memory, Everett. What about the memory you created for your own son?" Juliana asked, her voice like steel. "His first memories of his mother are in a prison visitation room. That's your legacy." Tears streamed down Everett's face, hot and shameful. "I know, God. I know. What can I do? Tell me what to do." "You want to atone," she asked finally, looking at him. "Then be a father. That's all. You can see Noah on Saturdays. You will pay for his education. You will never ever speak ill of me to him. You will answer his questions honestly when he is old enough to ask them. You will live with what you've done every single day. Just like I have to. That is your penance." He nodded, accepting her terms as if they were a lifeline. And then he asked the question. A faint, hopeful whisper. Juliana gave a sad, weary shake of her head. "There is no us. You can't rebuild a home after you've burned it to the ground." I loved you, Everett, but the man I loved wouldn't have let this happen. Vivienne was just a snake, but you opened the door and let her in. You held me down while she bit. She stood up. Her time with him concluded. Goodbye, Everett. She walked away, leaving him alone on the park bench, a billionaire with all the money in the world and nothing left to buy. The final scene of the story isn't one of revenge, but of quiet resilience. Months later, Juliana stands in a small, bright office, a blueprint for a community library spread out across her desk. She has started her own small architectural firm, focusing on public projects. Noah plays with blocks on the floor nearby. Her life isn't gilded anymore. It's real. Built with her own 2 hands. She is a survivor. Her strength forged in fire. Everett fulfills his role, a weekend father living in a silent penthouse haunted by ghosts. Vivienne received a lengthy prison sentence, and the Langston emerald necklace, recovered from a Swiss vault, now sits in the darkness of a museum archive, a tainted symbol of a love and a trust that was shattered beyond repair. Juliana Wells had lost a fortune, but in the end, she had reclaimed something far more valuable, herself. Juliana's story is a harrowing reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we love the most. She lost everything, but she never lost herself. Her fight for the truth, and her journey to reclaim her life and her son, is a testament to the strength of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit. So that's how the story ends. And to those of you, our incredible friends, who are still here, still watching at this moment, I know something in this story has touched your heart in some way. Let's take a moment together to reflect on what we've just witnessed. Juliana's journey is not just about betrayal and loss. It's about reclaiming dignity, love, and identity when the world has tried to take everything. She was broken by injustice, but rebuilt herself with grace. She didn't seek revenge. She chose truth. And in doing so, she taught us something essential. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Juliana couldn't control Everett's betrayal or the system that imprisoned her. But she could control her spirit, and she did. In her, we see the Stoic ideal of resilience in the face of chaos. She reminds us that even when the world brands us falsely, our worth doesn't diminish. Our truth doesn't vanish. This story is also a powerful call to forgiveness, not because someone deserves it, but because we deserve peace. Everett will live with what he did. But Juliana chose not to let his guilt define her future. So what does this mean for us? It means no matter how badly someone hurts us, no matter how far we fall, we still hold the power to rise, to define our own path, and to protect what truly matters. Especially when that means protecting our children, our purpose, or our peace. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, don't let it end here. Like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you stories that matter. Stories that remind us of our strength, even in silence. Because healing, friends, begins not when the pain ends, but when we decide to grow through it.